Most people are.
The difference between me, I think, and you, though, I read Heaven
Misplaced. Yeah.
Misplaced, read every word of it. And when I got done, I thought, I don't think I disagree with anything in this book. And I'm not a post-millennialist, so what's up? So I didn't regard anything in there as a compelling argument for post-millennialism. And you heard last night's message as an evidence of post-millennialism, and I'm thinking, I'm missing something. I'm not getting this. I think Jesus is going to break into this world and finish the job I described last night. That is, we are to plant the beachheads and then make as much advance as we can till he comes. And I think he's coming with a lot more mess in the world than you do.
A lot more mess remaining.
Remaining, precisely. Okay. He's got a lot of people to kill, and
all right, let's give every moment to tweet that.
That's a quote from 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 9. Don't take my word for it. And a lot of people to give rest to. He's going to give rest to us, and he's going to bring vengeance upon those who have not believed the gospel. 2 Thessalonians 1:9. So he breaks into the world when things are a huge mess. So and what I've never quite caught on with post-millennialists is how much mess can they tolerate before they stop being post-millennialists? Because I doubt that you mean that when the gospel sweeps the world and becomes triumphant, there's no mess left. I doubt that you mean that.
No, there's plenty of mess left.
And so the reason I don't write articles about this, I haven't written a book about it, and I don't get on his case publicly, though I might someday.
You did write a book about it. It's called Let the Nations Be Glad. I had the same sensations reading that as I did last night.
That's right. So I just lost my train of thought. A really good point to make. The reason I haven't written the other book is because it seems like the difference is one of quantitativity. I mean, let's forget about what happens on the other side of the second coming. That's another part of the argument, like the millennium and the 1,000 years and that. But on this side of the second coming, a post-millennialist is there's just a triumph of the nations and a golden age and so on. And for an optimistic premillennialist like me, this gospel will be preached throughout the whole world as a testimony to all the nations. So my triumph is we're going to penetrate every nation. How far we'll get in each of them and how Christianized my city could wind up being, I don't know. I just know the description of the second coming as it's portrayed in Paul especially is Jesus breaking in to a very, very messed up world and setting things right. Maybe one more comment about optimism. As I've preached at missions conferences and tried to be optimistic like last night about the triumph of the gospel and all the nations being included in the gospel, I've said I regard myself as torching the glacier because I picture the end time, the love of many will grow cold. All right? So this is the guy sitting watching TV with his flat screen, going to the refrigerator and saying, "Oh, it's the end times, it's all over." You know? So the love of many will grow cold. Now my conclusion from that is, I got a torch called the gospel. I've got a sovereign God whose hand is on my hand. And as the glacier comes over Minneapolis, I'm torching. It's everywhere. And nothing in my eschatology says I might melt the whole thing. I might melt the whole thing in Minneapolis. There's nothing in my eschatology that says Moscow couldn't be a city set on a hill and you might actually succeed in what you're about and have this whole thing look like the Christian Mecca of the universe here. That could happen. It wouldn't change my eschatology at all. But it won't be that way in every city.
Okay, so if I could, let's say we divide eschatology instead of pre, post, and amillennial, which are the standard divisions. Let's say we talked about optimillennialism and pessimillennialism. and leave out of it the train schedule stuff of rapture and dispensation, all the stuff where we might get caught up on details. And we're simply talking about the question of optimistic assumptions about history prior to the second coming of Christ, and pessimistic assumptions. Now, it seems postmillennialists have to be optimistic by definition. Amillennialists can be either optimistic or pessimistic, depending on their framework and outlook and understanding the word. Premillennialists can be either optimistic or pessimistic. So many premillennialists, the received assumption is pessimillennialism. That's the common assumption. But Spurgeon was premill, as you are, but he believed in the triumph of the gospel going forth, conquering and to conquer. So he believed in a real optimistic victory, expecting victory, preaching for victory. He expected that, and he did that within the context of premillennialism. So you're saying, I don't know to what extent this people group will be. One people group might be one to Christ at 80% level, one might be stuck at 2%. We have this variation. Is there anything in your understanding that would mandate that we couldn't disciple the nations, all of them?
Meaning what?
Just so the Great Commission, you've got the nations, the ethnoi, as the object of the verb. So Jesus says, all authority given to me, therefore go disciple the nations, baptizing them, teaching them obedience. So it seems to me the commission is to successfully evangelize all 16,000. Now, I don't think that necessarily means 100% for all 16,000, because you're right. I believe we're going to have problems right up to the end. And I would compare it to progressive sanctification in a Christian's life. By the end of Paul's life, he's now the chief of sinners. He's very aware of the things that still remain to be done. The closer we get to heaven and the realization of these things, the more aware we're going to be of the remaining deficiencies, etc. So the gospel only progresses through death and resurrection, which means 100 years before the end, it's still repenting, there's still death, there's still mortification of sin. It's not like it's a trouble-free.
Yeah, and there are, just to make the problem clear, there are massive setbacks. Like
right, yes.
North Africa was glorious.
And a massive setback.
It's gone.
Yeah.
And the Middle East. And so any sense of postmillennial progressivism has to deal with the realities of horrific Christian setbacks, which you say it's just God's concealed triumphs.
Right.
Which is true, all things considered. I believe all things work together for good. But that means that just on the brink of your getting to the point where this is as good as it has to get before Jesus comes, it could go backwards 500 years. And so the answer, I don't know how to answer your question, because I don't know to what degree disciplination means. If you give me 90%, 8%, I wouldn't know what to say. So the way to say it might be, there has to be enough mess in the world to make sense out of the passages that Jesus comes into in 2 Thessalonians. There has to be enough sense there to make. Like there can't be one unbeliever. That wouldn't make sense out of the passage. And so you back it up. So my question for you would be, is there anything in your view which would say it can only get to about 60%?
No.
That's why we get along.
Pastor Tim, do you want to get tangled up with us here?
I mean, one reflection is that moments like these, I'm glad to be English. You probably don't want to come to me, because I might complicate it a bit more.
That would be great.
I don't think the A, pre, post typology serves us well. I think there are probably better ways of setting up what the options
like Optum
are.
And pessimist.
Well, maybe that is the way forward. And then anyway, I think, I don't know if this will help or not, but I think that, one of the key things for me is that in Revelation 20, the people who reign with Christ are those who've been beheaded. Those are the ones who sit on thrones. And I think all the way through Revelation and there again, it is the way that the saints reign with Christ is actually through suffering and martyrdom. It is the Latimer and Ridley, which is, by the way, dear to me because I used to live near Oxford. I've stood on the spot many times. It's a very moving thing to do. And so so in terms of this discussion, I do think I'm both optimistic and pessimistic in the sense that I think that the gospel does advance, it does grow, the yeast through the dough and so on, but I also think that there is at the same time a reaction to that, and so the opposition grows, and so that advance is actually through suffering and through martyrdom and denial of self and so on, and and I think that accounts for that sense, all those promises that things that seem so optimistic, all those the things that you're talking about that seem so pessimistic, that actually that is the picture. Both of those are the picture, because the gospel advances, as it did from the beginning, more and more through suffering, through martyrdom, through those who overcome because they don't love their lives even unto death.
There's a larger issue in this than just eschatology, because it has to do with how you evaluate your own story. What is the meaning of these afflictions that God's brought into my life right now, or what our church is going through? And I see a lot of Christians dividing up in Hebrews 11, where you have these great heroes of the faith, and there's that section where you have those of whom the world is not worthy. They lived in caves, they wandered, and they were sawn in two, and you've got these terrible things happening to God's great victors. But then you've got, in that same passage, people who received dead back to life, who put armies to flight. You've got great heroes of the faith who succeed in ways that we would identify instantly as success. And then there are others who succeed in ways that we wouldn't call success unless we were taught by Scripture. So you've got to see it that way. So you see, was Jeremiah's ministry successful? Well, not by any reckoning or metric that we would come up with. But there were other ministries that were stupefyingly successful. John the Baptist, in terms of all of Judea. He was beheaded, but he was beheaded because he was so successful. There were so many people listening to him. So when we look at this, we are tempted, I think, sometimes to choose up sides, where we say, well, I prefer this kind of theology of the cross, and other people say, I prefer the theology of the crown. But I don't see how you can have one without the other. If you have the crown, you had to have had a cross. If you have the cross, God will raise you from the dead. He is going to accomplish his purpose through that.
I think maybe the tonal difference between a post and an optimistic pre is that the way I think, and I think the way Paul talks about the second coming, the physical arrival of Jesus to take authority on the planet, is that it comes as a relief to people in those moments of beheading and suffering. I'm coming to give you relief. He's saying that to the Thessalonians, that he's going to arrive and give relief to you and vengeance to those who are your enemies. It's portrayed as breaking into a horrific conflict where it's a precious triumph. We are being attacked, and he's coming and driving them back finally and forever. So that's the tone I feel about the second coming, and I'm not sure I've never been able to get inside the skin of a postmillennialist to see like what it feels like when he shows up.
It feels good.
Yes, it does. Another agreement.
There's just way too much material to get into, but I do agree with you that the postmillennialist has to account for these dark prophecies in the latter days, deceitful men, and most 20th and 21st century postmillennialists are on such passages are preterists and understand the last days there to be the last days of the old Judaic aeon 2,000 years ago. And there are some of those passages that apply to our future, but many of them, like what Paul tells Timothy about what's going to happen in the last days, these deceivers will rise to know. And then he says to Timothy, who's been dead 2,000 years, from such turn away. Right? These are men that you're going to be dealing with in your lifetime.
So are you one of those preterists?
Yeah, well, I'm not. I believe that what's called full preterism or hyper-preterism is heretical because it denies the second coming and denies the resurrection of the dead. And it proves way too much. But I am what's called a partial preterist. I believe that many of the prophecies that you would point to describe how Jesus comes back at the end of the world are how Jesus came in judgment on Jerusalem, how he intervened in the last days of the Judaic aeon. So you have the old Judaic aeon and the new Christian aeon overlapping by about 40 years. The Pentecost inaugurates the Christian aeon. 70 AD concludes the Judaic aeon. And the author of Hebrews says this old order is fading away. It's passing away. This world is coming to nothing. They're coming to nothing. And so when Jerusalem falls, I think that's the church coming out of the wilderness, 40 years in the wilderness, and the church invading Canaan. So that's it. But I don't believe that we can take every passage that talks about, this.
Second Thessalonians 1?
No, second, I have not preached through 1st and 2nd Thessalonians because I'm not ready.
Read it for yourself. Read it for yourself.
All right, I believe that we are out of time. So